Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hyperspace on Dark Matter Radio. I'm your host, Miss Solaris BlueRaven. I want to thank everyone for tuning in this evening, and a special thank you to webmaster and producer Keith Rowland. And my special guest this evening is Mark Snider. Mark has worked in the software field for the last 20 years, and he is currently employed as a senior programmer analyst at a Fortune 500 company in Columbus, Ohio. He has a B.F.A. from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and a B.B.A. from the University of Cincinnati. Mark was a competitive bodybuilder for years and won the following titles of winner light heavy class in Mr. Midwest in 1989 and overall winner of Mr. Glass City in 1989. He performs as a solo finger-style guitarist at many venues in Central Ohio. Mark has recorded the following 2 CDs of guitar music, Living Water and Songs of the Night. And in 2010, he started a radio show called Ohio Exopolitics on Blog Talk Radio. And Mark is also a seasoned researcher in the Billy Meier material, of which we will be discussing this evening as well. Please welcome Mark Snider to the show this evening. Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great, Solaris. How are you this evening?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, it's my pleasure. I've been listening to your show, and I must say it's just been really outstanding.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Doing a great job at Dark Matter Radio.
Well, thank you. That's well appreciated. I enjoy it over here. And bear with us as we have a little bit of white noise feedback there, but we'll try to work through this.
You know, it's so funny because you guys sound so clear to me.
Yeah, your voice sounds clear. There's just a little bit of feedback, white noise in the background, but we'll work through that. But what current projects are you working on right now?
You mean at the day job? Or?
Well, insofar as your investigations go and your research, what have you been up to?
Well, on my, I have 2 radio shows. I have a radio show, as you know, Revolution Radio, and another one at Blog Talk Radio. The Blog Talk Radio show is pretty much dedicated to the Billy Meier case, and it's nothing I planned. It's just something that's happened over the years, and I've been going sequentially through the contact notes, the Play-RN contact notes, and we're on Contact 60 right now. We just finished Contact 60. I have a friend in the field who has been giving me information. Here's the story with the Billy Meier case. There are thousands and thousands of pages of these contact notes, most of which are written in German. Now, the people in the FIGU, which is the organization that works with Billy Meier, they've made the decision to no longer translate things into English. So there are whole vast areas of very, very interesting material that are slowly being translated into English. And I have a friend, Larry Driscoll, who does the translations. So he is feeding me some of this material that I can't get on the Future of Mankind site. All the contact notes in the Billy Meier case that have been translated into English are posted on this website. It's called The Future of Mankind. The guy that runs it is a guy in England named James Moore. So right now I'm in Contact Report 60, and I did Contact Report 59, both of which are not really available to the people of North America until now, which is really kind of cool, actually. And what it's about, what those 2 contacts really are about Atlantis and Lemuria, and something else called the Destroyer Comet. So those are the main topics there. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of basically what I've been working right now as far as my investigations are going. There's also a lot of really interesting writings by Billy Meier that, Billy has written later in life. And we'll talk about a little bit of that tonight. I mean, we've got 2 hours, so we've got a little time. One of which is called The Goblet of Truth, which Billy wrote in 2008. And another writing called The OM, which it's called The Book of Books, OM, which stands for Omphalen Morado, which is a Lyrian word, which means life's navel or navel of life. And I could read a little bit of Canon 8 from the Book of O.M. if you'd like to.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and this is the more of a philosophical approach to his material, right?
Very much so.
Oh.
Very much so. And I'll try to paint that whole picture because I don't think people generally get to hear that aspect of the case. It's a whole nother world. But this is Canon 8, and starting at line 16, it says, creation lived, thought, had feeling and sensitivity, mind and intelligence, and the idea of life. And it grew powerful and mighty in true love to expand and stretch itself. With its power, it changed its thoughts and its idea into becoming. So it therefrom created space and time. It created the universe thus, which in its expanse was empty and only filled with the spiritual power energy of expanding creation.
It's very pretty.
Yeah, very beautiful. There's a very poetic quality to the Meier case. And what they're talking about there is this notion called creation. See, the Plejaren, they don't use the term God. They tell us that there is a spiritual creator of our universe, but it's a neutral positive entity, and it builds universes as a part of its own evolution. Billy's public mission began in 1975, and his contacts started with a woman named Semyase, a 350-year-old Plejaren woman, and she would describe the creation this way. In very poetic terms, she would say, wisdom and love go together, and the creation and its laws are wisdom and love. Where there is wisdom, there is knowledge, and where there is love, there is cognition. She explained to Billy that every human has within them a spirit that does not sleep, that records everything he does, that will tell him if his thinking is right or wrong. And she explained that human spirit is a tiny holographic fractal copy of the universal consciousness. The universal consciousness encompasses all of nature, all the spiritual life. I can explain it this way. In his book, Goblet of Truth, which he wrote in 2008, there's a paragraph in there which is entitled, What the Truth Knows to Say. And it goes on and it says, rivers, lakes, streams, brooks, stones, seas, the earth, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form. And those spirit forms are on a journey through time. And these creatures are connected by psychic vibrations. And he goes on to explain that if you go into the woods and you listen, you can hear the insects, the cicadas, the grasshoppers, the crickets. You can hear all the different species of birds. Sometimes you can even hear the owls and animals like the coyotes and the wolves. And you can watch the birds fly in flocks, and they move together like a single entity because they're all connected by these psychic vibrations. You can see schools of fish move in unison because they're all connected by this indissoluble web of life. And Billy wrote later in some of his writings, he wrote a whole kind of book on this concept of love. He says that this superintelligence which built our universe, he explained it this way. He says it radiates love. And he said that the indescribable splendor of nature is nothing more than the visible expression of the love of creation. And without the love of creation, nothing would exist that exists today, and that love is the highest principle in creation, and that everything follows the principle of love in absolute logic. And he goes on and explains that even the tiniest animals in creation fulfill their purpose, but only the human being can close himself off to the love of creation. Mm-hmm. Now, when Billy was a very young boy, he lived in Boulac, Switzerland, and he would often wander off into the woods because he loved nature. One day, he was looking at the fish in the stream, and he saw a flash in the sky, and he looked over, and out of the sky came this silvery pear-shaped craft, which came all the way down to a field, a few inches above the field, and stopped and kept hovering. And out of this craft stepped this elderly man, which he would later learn his name was Svath. Svath walked over to young Billy and took him back into his ship. Now, Svath started explaining to Billy who he was. He told Billy that he was the seventh prophet in a line of 7 prophets, and that for the past 13,000 years, his human spirit has incarnated on the earth in various times, and he has been Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, Muhammad, and in this lifetime, he will be Edward Albert Meyer, and he will be the last prophet that teaches this information. The information that he's teaching is the same information with different vocabulary and a different emphasis. It's called the teaching of the Spirit. And the teaching of the Spirit involves basically 5 different categories. The first is understanding universal consciousness, which is what we talked about a little bit. Mm-hmm. We've also briefly touched on the human spirit, but the teaching of the Spirit talks about reincarnation. It talks about learning to control your thinking, and it also talks about personal responsibility. And Svath told Billy that his mission in life was to reintroduce to the people of the earth these principles that are in the teaching of the Spirit. And he warned Billy many things. He warned him that some people would try to kill him. He was warned that people would ridicule him. He was told that even his wife would call him a hoaxer. He was told that he would have a very difficult life. But eventually, his teaching would bring in a new age of peace and prosperity and a golden age. But first, the people of the earth have to go through something called the third millennium. So, Solaris, I know I've just been talking forever.
Oh, yeah, I know, but I'm letting you talk and run this information so the listeners can understand what this data is about. But you did mention to me before about contact report number 215 and how that kind of correlates with something that's happening on this timeline. I'm wondering if you can kind of connect the dots with that one.
Yes, it's certainly a very, very different topic than talking about nature and love and things like that. It's the other side of the Meier material. Svath told Billy that in 1945, when the United States dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that we were starting to enter into a time that he called the third millennium, a time of destruction. It's a transition period before we get into this age of enlightenment. And as you mentioned, Contact 215, the Hanok prophecies, have some very dire prophecies. What we're going to see are general historical trends. It says our leaders will become megalomaniacal. They will become self-aggrandizing. They will exaggerate their own importance. And they will start this program of taking away people's self-determination. And we're seeing that now in the removal of our free speech and the removal of the right to bear arms, the removal of a right to a fair trial in the NDAA. All these things that the New World Order is bringing in are designed to take away our rights of self-determination. Now, the Meier material has something called Contact 215, the Henoch prophecies. Henoch was the first incarnation of this human spirit that the extraterrestrials refer to as Nocodamian. Nocodamian is a very, very ancient spirit that has not only incarnated on Earth, but other worlds to teach spiritual information. His first incarnation on Earth was as Henoch, and Henoch gave some prophecies about our time. Henoch was born about 9,000 years ago. Now, this is very ironic because Billy is the latest incarnation of that same spirit. So one of the extraterrestrials named Quetzal tells Billy what his spirit has said in previous ages, which is a tremendous irony here. And I'll explain to you why that happens or how that can happen later. But the most important message in the Henoch prophecies is this. It says that in North America will be the greatest catastrophe in recorded history. It will involve nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons, and it will involve military machines, computerized military machines that run out of the control of humans. So now let's just take a look at what this is saying, because this is the greatest disaster in recorded history. Worse than World War II, worse than World War I, worse than Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Fukushima, the Gulf oil spill, you name it, worse than the Black Death in the Middle Ages. This is something that's coming to North America. It's a prophecy, which means that if we stay on the path we're on, it's going to occur, but it doesn't mean it has to happen. Now, on the good news side is our thinking, according to these extraterrestrials, has improved a lot since World War II. And a lot of these disasters were slated to happen by this time, and they haven't happened yet. So I think that's something to be happy about.
Mm-hmm. Right. Consciousness can affect the timeline without a doubt. So if you get everybody up to speed, insofar as higher consciousness goes, then we can alter things that could be detrimental, I would say.
Do you get the feeling that something large and negative could happen in the United States?
I think it's very volatile right now, intuitively speaking. I think anything goes at this point, but I also feel a lot of people are very enlightened and are waking up. So I think that we can alter things and, we can turn it around. And it's through this darkness that we become enlightened, in my opinion. I mean, you learn it's almost like trial by fire to some extent. But, what's interesting about that contact report number 215, I mean, it almost sounds like a little bit of transhumanism in there. With the machines.
Yeah. And it goes on in more detail, and it talks about runaway machines that have gone out of control. Mm-hmm. It talks about human cloning for warring purposes in Contact 215. And then in a similar number, Contact 251, it talks specifically about the rise of the robot people and how people will have their arms and legs amputated to be attached to machinery. Mm-hmm. It's very bizarre. When I first, when I read the Meier material, I'm shocked because I'm like, how could this happen? And then live a few more years, and then you say, wow.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Oh, yeah, we're almost there with the technology. I mean, there's no doubt about that. You see it every day. You know, replacing body parts with nanotechnology and everything else. So, yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I like your philosophical approach to the information because I think it's a lot of data. And I think over the years, especially, trying to convert it from German, I suspect it would be, or translate it rather, it would be a little bit more difficult. And they might not get everything that they should have with the information. But my question to you is, with the Billy Meier experience, do you think it's possible he was subjected to a covert military operation on that timeline? Even the UFOs, they could have been manufactured as a covert craft, and even the extraterrestrials would have been something like a modified, genetically engineered or enhanced human that would appear as an extraterrestrial. What is your impression of that?
That's so interesting. I will say this. I like to keep an open mind to all possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know. I would like to keep an open mind. One interesting thing is that part of Billy's training with Sloth as a young child involved deep electronic hypnosis, which you could say is a form of mind control.
Right, yeah. Very much so. And I keep an open mind as well. You know, I know that we have many species on and off world, and obviously when you connect with your higher self, a lot of things can descend into your being. I find it really fascinating. The case is fascinating, and I know it's gotten a lot of heat in the past by certain people, but it's still an interesting case nonetheless.
Oh, it's very, very interesting. And it's funny, over the years as I've studied it more and more, I've lost interest in so many other cases that involved, a simple little sighting here and there, a light in the sky. Even if a person did have a brief contact, it was very, very brief. This is a different animal altogether, because Billy's initial set of contacts occurred for 11 years, from about 1945 when he was 5 years old until he was about 16 years old. His next set of contacts occurred from about 16 years old to about 27 years old. And if you'd like, I could tell you about those. Or if you have another question, we can...
Well, I have all sorts of questions for you, but I'd like you to go ahead and roll with the energy you feel guided to talk about tonight as well. But I do feel you're right. I think that the interaction with his, whatever this was, the extraterrestrial, whatever you want to call it, is very important, because a lot of people just get the visuals or they just get sightings like you were mentioning. And there has to be some kind of intimacy or some kind of a relationship established, in my opinion, to validate the case. I mean, you need more than just a visual. You know, there has to be more than that. And especially, I believe that she was in connection with him, or actually communication through telepathy. Is that correct?
Yeah, he had, in all of his contacts, telepathy was involved. Even as a young boy, he had telepathy with Sloth before actual physical contacts. And there was a pastor in his hometown of Bulak named, I think his name was Rudolph Zimmerman, who evidently had some kind of telepathic contact himself. When young Billy, of about 5 years old, goes to the priest in town there and tells him about these voices in his head, the priest, instead of telling him it's demons, he says, that information could be very, very important, Billy. So pay special and close attention to it, and don't feel bad about that information you're getting, because it's important. So we had support.
I hope you don't hear that in the background. That's my dog's toy. Anyways,
like some material. Is he relaxing?
Yes, he is. That's interesting, because it reminds me of, once again, the technological communication system. Now, there is a covert technology, and I've talked about this before, about synthetic telepathy and other things, where it's actually a covert process where there is a communication between the target and the operator, so to speak. So, you can take it to that parallel on some levels, and I don't discount anything. nothing at all. I find it very interesting, though, and I guess, from what you're relaying with the information, the contact reports, it is very significant on many levels because it approaches things on a very sophisticated philosophical level opposed to just regular, mundane conversation about control and manipulation, which is more of the agenda of a New World Order, I would suspect.
Well, what's interesting, Solaris, is one of the things that Thoth taught him was a telepathy that involves symbols. And it's not a language-specific kind of telepathy. There are supposedly universal symbols that Billy was taught, and there are two kinds of telepathy. One is kind of a short-range telepathy, and the other is long-range telepathy, for lack of a better word at this point. And Thoth taught him this symbol language involved in this second highest form of telepathy. He was taught that at a very, very young age. So when he goes to a contact site and has a physical contact, and this conversation goes on back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, well, he will go home, and either the computer on the ship, usually it's the computer on the ship, will send him that information word for word that was in the contact, but not in English, not in German, but in this symbolic universal language that he learned as a very, very young boy. And then he would type at 60 words a minute with one hand while he typed out these contact notes. So the whole process of telepathy is very, very interesting, and I think it's...
I'm going to have to take that toy away. I'm sorry, you guys.
I think your dog has...
Figures when the show starts, right? He's fine without it. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. There are two kinds of telepathy. There's long-range and the short-range telepathy.
Mm-hmm, right.
Long-range telepathy involves these symbols. The short-range telepathy can be mind-to-mind via thought. So I just thought I would throw that aspect in so that the listeners could understand how the contact notes come about. Now, the contact notes were all typed out in German, and later parts were translated. Now, have you heard of the Bible code?
Yes.
Well, in the original German, there's a code that speaks to your subconscious that will cause a spiritual evolution that you're not even aware of. It will open up things between your subconscious and what's called the universal consciousness, or the storage banks. And that's one of the reasons why the people at the FIGU no longer translate into English, because the German language is very similar to the ancient Lyrian language. Now, the ancient Lyrians, as far as I know, were the first extraterrestrials to visit the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I can talk about them unless you have another question.
Oh, sure. You can elaborate on that as well. And I did want to ask you real quick, how many contact reports did you say there were?
I have to be honest. The Plejaren contact reports are up around 500.
Mm-hmm.
There are roughly a dozen contact reports involving ASCII, and an even fewer number of published contact reports involving Thoth. So I would roughly guess around 550 contact reports, and that involves thousands and thousands of pages of information.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the 60, I've actually covered 70 contact reports. I have a book of information, just from the first 60 or 70. And so there's more information here than I could cover in my whole life.
Oh my goodness, yeah, there really is a lot to decode.
And he's written 20 or 30 books, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what Thoth told him. Thoth told him to stay in the background, to concentrate on his writing. He was told that there'd be attempts on his life. He said the people of the earth make for themselves idols. So he was told to stay in the background. It's very interesting. He doesn't do radio shows. Occasionally, they can get him to sit in front of a camera and answer questions or talk. And unfortunately, he only speaks in German now. He won't even speak in English, which he can speak in English. He used to speak very well in English. So I don't know exactly why, but...
That's interesting. It's almost like he's delegated his power, too, to a few people. I know Michael Horn represents him on some level. So, like a front man for him, so...
And I would love to go there. I would love to go to Switzerland someday. So, well, he's had 21 attempts on his life. He's in his 70s now. So he's very, very cautious about who he meets with, which I guess is understandable.
Yeah, he might be burned out. I would think he was burned out, just...
Well, he had a breakdown. I forget when it was exactly. He works ridiculously hard. So, and yeah, he did have a breakdown. But I'm rambling. Do you want me to get back on the material?
Oh, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the material. Then we'll switch gears a little bit, too, because I do want to talk about worldly affairs, but I do think this all correlates. And I know you've done extensive research in kind of what I would say decoding his information, and you've done a fabulous job at doing that because it's approaching it on a different level of communication than the regular people that I've heard explain his material.
Well, thank you. That's very nice of you. I appreciate
You're welcome.
the fact that you can appreciate it.
Yeah, I do.
I think I'll go into the ancient past and then come forward. How's that?
That sounds great.
If we step back, the Meier material says in Contact Report 238 that Nocodamian led his people from the depths of the known universe into the oldest space-time shifted regions of the constellation of Lyra. The Lyrians settled on these very, very large planets around the star Vega. They were huge. They were 20-some feet tall. Not only that, they were human beings living in what the Meier material calls creational wisdom. There are 7 steps of evolution in humans, and they were at the 5th stage. Some of them were at the 5th stage. They started to colonize our Milky Way galaxy. They settled other worlds. They mixed with other people. Sometimes they conquered other worlds. And they had what by all rights could be called kind of a galactic empire. Now, at the height of their civilization, something called the Destroyer Comet came through, which is a very large comet, and caused a disaster in their solar system, which sent them back millions of years. They had to rebuild their society. And after the society was rebuilt, certain people came into power. And they had a term for these people. They were called Ishwish or King of Wisdom or JHWH. These are people that had learned to utilize the human spirit. Remember at the beginning of the show, I said the human spirit is a fragment of this super intelligence which runs the universe. And it has incredible powers. We just don't know that yet. Now, the people living in creational wisdom, the Ishwishes, can do telepathy, telekinesis, levitation, look into the future, look into the past. And some of these Ishwishes weren't as benevolent as they could be. And they became, some of the rulers ruled by dictatorial kind of force. And there was an uprising among these planets. In fact, the Lyrians, some of these Ishwishes were outright warlike, and they conquered other worlds, and they had incredible weapons which would dissolve entire planets. Some of these other people in other worlds had no chance against these Lyrians. Anyway, there was a civil war that erupted, and one Ishwish left the Lyrian constellation, His name was Asael, and he brought 230,000 people with him. Excuse me. He had 183 motherships and 250 smaller ships. And they went and became what we today call the Pleiaren. They settled in this little world called Era, which is very much like Earth, except it has a much higher oxygen content. They went through warlike times, and they had to develop as well. Now, even before Asael founded the Pleiarans, there was a migration to the Earth, and that was 289,000 years ago. The Lyrians came here en masse, about 2 million of them. Now, at that time, the Earth humans were very underdeveloped. They were almost like wild animals. They roamed the Earth in packs. I mean, this is a long, long time ago. And these people were living at a very, very high level of evolution. They just wanted to get out of these wars that were going on in Lyra Vega, and they wanted to settle in their own area. Well, as time went on, some of these Lyrians broke what's called creational natural laws. The universal consciousness, creation, creates universal natural laws. I mean, a real obvious one is gravity. Another one, I could argue, would be reincarnation. Well, what they did, some of these Lyrians, they mixed with the Earth people sexually. Other ones did genetic experiments. They abused the people of the Earth. Well, other Lyrians found out about this, and they decided to banish these people to the Earth. In other words, they took their technology, they took their ships, and they left them stranded here. Now, these ancient, highly evolved spirits became part of the reincarnational patterns of Earth. So the beginning of the imbalance on Earth started in the ancient past. Now, if we fast forward back to 230,000 years ago, we have this exodus from Lyra Vega. Asael is in charge. He eventually dies, and his daughter takes over. His daughter is his name Playa, and they named their star system the Pleiaren star system. And the Pleiaren at that time still were not as evolved as they are today. They had their own wars. They also went out and colonized. They came to our solar system. They came to Mars. They came to the Earth. They also came. There was another planet in our solar system at that time called Melona. They also set up little colonies there, none of which lasted very long. They all got involved in wars and had trouble, and they eventually all went back to their home world. Now, if you go back to 150,000 years ago, a man left Era. He left the Pleiaren star system, and he came to the Earth. He was a scientist, and he also had something like 70,000 people with him. His name was Pelagon. Now, these people, when I say they're scientists, they not only use the scientific method, but they study things in a very balanced way. They also study spirituality. So he was an Ishwish. The legends are that he could levitate himself, that he could cause plants to grow. He could look into the future, into the past. He had telepathy. The native Earth people confused him with the creator of the universe, but he never presented himself that way. He lived as a very wise, benevolent man. He lived for 2,000 years, and the people he brought with him reproduced, and there was this incredibly advanced society all over the Earth 150,000 years ago. After Pelagon died, another man came into power. His name was Jessus. He was not nearly as benevolent. He started to abuse his abilities again, and again, war broke out. And this incredible war occurred on the Earth that nearly wiped out all life on the Earth. Some of the people escaped, and they went to a nearby star system called the Barnard Star. For 7,000 years, the Earth had no visitation from extraterrestrials. It was still trying to recover from this devastation. Eventually it did, and the Earth became a very beautiful place again. And there were still people on the Earth. People that at this point were still not very advanced. And a man came here named Atlant from the Barnard Star. He was a descendant of some of the followers of Pelagon. And he brought spiritual teachings back to the Earth again. And he was a very benevolent man, a man of obvious Lyrian descent, blonde hair, blue eyes, pasty white skin, broad shoulders. His wife, Cariatide, was also at this high spiritual level, living in creational wisdom. And they settled on the continent of Atlantis, which was somewhere between Africa and South America near the equator. Had a tremendous climate, perfect for living. Well, it wasn't long before the beautiful architecture of the Atlanteans was seen on this island continent. You could see like a skyline forming. Other people came. One person was named Miras, and he built the city of Lemuria, which was located in what we would call the Gobi Desert today. But it was very beautiful at that time. It wasn't a desert. Underneath the city of Lemuria, they built Agartha Alpha and Agartha Beta, two underground cities that were connected by this tunnel system. And these great cities lived in peace for about 2,000 years. And then more extraterrestrials migrated to the Earth. People came from, I think, from Beta Centauri. The leader they referred to as Eris the Barbarian. And I'm not 100% certain of this, but I think his descendants became the Aryans here on the Earth. So when Hitler was looking for the Aryans, he really was looking for real peoples, real peoples with extraterrestrial roots. Eris the Barbarian came here with 200 scientists, leaders and sub-leaders working under him. One of them was named Semyasa. And Semyasa violated again these creational natural laws, and he mated with a primitive earth woman who they were still called Evas. And in many sense, they roamed the earth in packs like wild animals. Now, the offspring of that was a man named Adam, which means earthman. And they went one step farther, and they mated Adam with another Eva. And the rumor has it is that line became Adam and what we call Adam and Eve in the line, I think, of the white people here on Earth. Now, Eris was enraged by this. He didn't really go along with this at all. But over time, he accepted it. And Eris went on trying to stir up trouble between Atlantis and Lemuria. There was some ancient vendetta. Right now, I forget what it is. But eventually, he got this war stirred up between Atlantis and Lemuria. And the Atlanteans struck first. And they had hundreds of these ships with these beams which would produce this incredible heat. And they melted the city of Lemuria to the ground. Some of the Lemurians escaped. And they went to the asteroid belt. And they got a giant asteroid. And they attached a drive system to it. It was both atomic and electromagnetic, and they brought it back to the Earth like a great weapon. and they aimed it at Atlantis. By this time, the Atlanteans had gone back to Atlantis, and they were celebrating their great victory. And shortly thereafter, they look up in the sky and were filled with horror because they could see this great asteroid coming into the atmosphere of Earth. And by this time, it was making this horrific whirring sound, which they could literally hear even at this great distance, hundreds of miles in the sky. And then it superheated and burst into flame practically. And this tremendous heat went all across the Earth, and it scorched many places. Then the asteroid exploded at about 100 kilometers up or something like that. And the contact notes describes it as like 32,000 atomic bombs hitting the Earth in various locations. Well, there were still 2 large pieces left, and the contact notes describes these as like 2 great fists slamming into the Atlantic Ocean and eventually slamming into the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, where they cracked open the Atlantic floor and lava poured out, and volcanoes started, and earthquakes started, and Atlantis sunk beneath the waves, and there was a great pole shift on Earth. And again, the Earth is wiped out. Now, this is only 11,500 years ago. So Atlantis, there's a lot to learn about Atlantis, but that great disaster occurred 11,500 years ago, which is just a very, very short time in terms of geology and these incredible events. And I'm sorry I went so long, but
well, that's okay. No, I wanted you to explain the story for our listeners. And it's very interesting. The whole material is very, very fascinating in general. And I'm wondering if there are any scientific anomalies which can validate this material. You hear it as kind of a fairy tale sometimes, and then you kind of wonder if there isn't something that can back it up on a material level. And what's your impression of that?
I think there is. I think there really is. There is documented evidence that these 2 great fists that I talk about, there's 2 great canyons in the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, you would have to ask Michael Horn. He would give you all the science and that aspect of it. But you bring up a really, really good segue. Mm-hmm. And I'll go wherever you want, and I've gone so long here. I don't want to...
that's fine. No, you're the guest, so hey. But I will ask you, do you ever meditate on the Meier material? I know you do a lot of meditation. Have you ever really looked into it as a remote viewer, or just to kind of tap into the timeline to see if you could see anything extra with the data?
It's a very good question, because my understanding is I'm no meditation expert. I've been doing it for 2 years now. And I do meditate sometimes for hours at a time. I do what I would call meditation sleep. In other words, I don't go to sleep, but I go into this deep, 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 deep state of relaxation just to the point before sleep. And when thoughts come into my mind, I try to push them out. Now, I do let images come in. And sometimes I get these very, very interesting and beautiful images at times. Sometimes when I sit outside in the sunshine and I'm in nature, I do go into a kind of meditation where I'm a little more alert. Now, there's another kind of meditation where you can do just what you're talking about, where you're meditating on an idea or a concept and trying to find out the logic behind it and find out the real truth underlying it. I've done that accidentally before and solved technical problems that I'm working on at work. But I'm just now starting to get into that. And I haven't really done that yet. But that's a very, very, very good question. For me, it's like this. This is my experience with the Meier material. When you go into a beautiful forest, and you're just in awe at the beauty. When you look at a sunset and you're in awe of the beauty. when you hear what's to you beautiful music and you're just in awe at the experience and the beautiful music. I'm still in that awe state with the Meier material. So maybe I've not yet become that critical. Mm-hmm. There are aspects of the Meier material that I shake my head at. I'm astonished at it. I'll give you something. I'll just throw this out here and we'll see what happens. That I'm just, it's just, I don't know how they can say that, but they say that with the chemtrails, we're not really being sprayed. I read that and I go, how can that be? And they explain it as persistent contrails and atmospheric conditions and moisture and lack of moisture, and something very bad is happening to the ecology of Earth, and I think that's a manifestation of it. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of good arguments for the fact that we are being sprayed. I'm sure you would agree with that.
Oh yeah, I do. I mean, I notice a difference.
Absolutely.
When there are chemtrails out, I call them chemtrails. But yeah, I've noticed the skies have changed over the years, without a doubt. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure that one out, though.
Changed horribly every day. I mean, we used to have blue skies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't see blue skies very often anymore. And the one thing I do notice is that the sun is always obscured. And to me, the sun is everything. I mean, without the sun, we have no life, as far as I'm concerned. So it's fuel for the... What's that?
Our immune system is compromised.
Yeah, I mean, it's fuel for the soul and the spirit and the cells and the atoms and for nature and the plants. And we truly do need the sunlight. So that's the one thing that I've really noticed, especially living out where I live, because I'm used to seeing the sun all the time, and it's changed over the years. I'd say 10 to 15 years. It's totally changed.
Can you imagine what the children must feel like right now? What they haven't experienced and what they may not experience?
Yeah. I find that to be very sad, too, because they're growing up in an environment where it's almost disconnected from what I would call source, universal consciousness, and just the harmonics of nature in general.
Oh, so true, so true. Mm-hmm. And we have such a disrespect for nature, and we're destroying nature.
Yeah, it's very sad to see. I mean, there are many of us who do appreciate the earth, and we do respect the land and nature, but there are others that don't, and I think there needs to be a balance. I mean, we talk about this all the time, and it certainly needs to be established.
Yeah, and I think it's leading to this third millennium that we started talking about at the beginning of the show.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And even the material you're reading, I mean, the Billy Meier material, if nothing else, it's triggering you insofar as it's like a food for your soul. It's activating you to think. It's reminding you of something beyond the illusion of the false matrix. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt, as we all do, but I think that it is enlightening you to some extent to go beyond the boundaries of limitation.
Let me read one little passage from what's called Love Teaching Letter number 27. It says, each smallest plant, each ever so tiny animal was created in love by creation, each creation existing according to the same law of love. All life is in the absolute perfection, that which it should be through the love of creation. And except for humans, every life form lives exactly by this creation's plans. Only humans have turned away from love and must now learn again what true love is. The infinite love of creation connects all life, because in all life, this love lies hidden.
Mm-hmm. It's very pretty.
That's so profoundly beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
And, to me, it's less about the craft themselves and more about this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. More about spirituality.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if you've ever practiced Tai Chi or not, but you would be really good at it.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I could see you doing that, so you might want to look into it. Or Qigong exercises. I don't know if you've ever done those at all.
You have to tell me more about Tai Chi.
Well, it's just harnessing universal life force energy, and I think you would tune right into it, and I bet you would really enjoy it. So definitely check it out sometime. I would recommend Tai Chi for you.
Do you feel it's therapeutic?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I used to. Well, people who don't know, I'm actually a martial artist. I'm a black belt, and I taught Taekwondo and then a mixed martial arts class. And then, of course, for warm down, we'd always do Tai Chi. or Qigong exercises, and that's to reset and recenter the body. So it really resonates. I mean, it just kind of resets your whole system, your circulatory system, your exotonal lines, your holographic field, your chakra system, and it really allows you to breathe in what we call universal life force energy, which is used for healing. And with your meditative side and the way you think philosophically, I think you would really enjoy that.
Do you think it enhances your health?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You've heard of the Qigong masters and, just basically using universal life force energy to heal. There's systems like Reiki that you can literally just work on people and open up the energy fields and start healing.
Do you think that kind of our whole lifestyle now drains us of this Qi energy?
Oh, I think so. And you coming from your world of, computers and programming, I would suspect you get a little bit drained at work. But yeah, definitely there has to be a balance without a doubt. And I think you and I both know that.
I get majorly drained at work.
Yeah, because there is dirty electricity. I mean, we get exposed to that every day. So you need to use something or do something to alter that and to reset your electromagnetic field so that it's not getting pulled on or, polluted in some way.
There was a guy I interviewed years ago, and I've got his book. He wrote a book called Dirty Electricity.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I interviewed him in ages and ages, but I don't even know if he's still alive, to tell you the truth. But
I have heard that book. And Mark, you know what? We're going to head for a break real quick. We'll be right back. Everybody, stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody, to Hyperspace on Dark Matter Radio. I'm Solaris BlueRaven, and I'm here with my special guest, Mark Snider. And just a recap for Mark, he is quite an interesting individual. He's worked in the software field for over 20 years and has done extensive research in the Billy Meier material, so we're really happy to have him on tonight. And Mark, I hear a lot of white noise. You must be back.
Man, I'm so sorry about this white noise. I don't know what's causing it.
It's your electromagnetic field.
It probably is.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad to have you on board tonight. It's really a pleasure listening to you and all the information you have. And you've done so much research on Billy Meier, so I do appreciate what you're relaying to the audience tonight. And I would like to ask you a little bit, and we'll get back to Billy Meier material as well, but insofar as worldly affairs go, what is your impression? I know you've been doing a lot of research on Fukushima. What do you think about that? What do you think is happening over there?
Well, it's not good. It's certainly not good. And I'll try to lower my mic just a tad. I don't know if that'll help or not.
Yeah, it's worth a shot.
Well, people don't realize this, but for 3 years now, we've had 3 nuclear reactors in total meltdown. What happened basically is there is a material around these fuel rods which melted And there's a steel containment vessel, which this liquid corium that was formed by these fuel rods melted through the steel containment vessel and then into the concrete building. And the liquid corium at this point is probably, after 3 years, have melted through the concrete containment as well. So we've had 3 nuclear reactors and a complete total meltdown. And all they've done for the past nearly 3 years now is pour water on this liquid molten corium. Now the water fills up around these reactors, and then they pump the radioactive water out, and they store it in tanks. And there's something like 2,000 tanks of this radioactive water all around Fukushima now. And there's no sight, there's no end in sight. And the public is so uneducated. I've done several shows on Fukushima, and one of the things I've done is just question people in my daily life. You know, usually the way I'll put it is, are you keeping up with what's going on at Fukushima? And almost all of them, to the person, will say, well, what's Fukushima? So out of 21 people that I've discussed this with, only 3 even knew what Fukushima was. So that gives you kind of an idea of the challenge that we have in the alternative community to educate people. Mm-hmm. And I think it even goes beyond our radio shows, and we need to reach out to people in a kind way, in a non-threatening way, and tell them about these things.
Right. Yeah, it's information.
It is. And I want to applaud you on the tremendous job that you've done on your show, which I loved your show with Sean David Morton.
Oh, thank you.
And Betsy Lewis, just to name a few. You've done a real good job. You're one of the unsung heroes, I think. And there are people that are working to make a better world, not necessarily to make a profit, mm-hmm. but to make a better world. And I think if we don't start focusing on that, there's not going to be a world to make better.
I agree. Yeah, you can only get so far with money, to be honest, and then you have to go beyond it all. And I think that's, once again, we're dealing with consciousness and how consciousness applies to everyday living. You know, usually when people are tuned in, I mean, they have more compassion for their fellow man, they're more compassionate with the earth, and they're more understanding of the bigger picture. So, I think information is critical, that people get awakened to what's really happening across the globe, just to benefit everyone. I mean, no fear or no, we're not trying to spread any disinformation or anything like that. We're just trying to educate the masses and say, look, this is what's happening. So I think that's important. And also, Mark, I would applaud you on your show, too, because you have a fabulous show. And I'd like you to tell our listeners about your show.
I have a show on Revolution Radio. It's on Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's called Ohio Exopolitics. I also have a show on Blog Talk Radio on Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, and we focus on the Billy Meier material. If you Google Billy Meier or Ohio Exopolitics, Google Ohio Exopolitics, and you'll find the links for the shows. The links are hard to remember. The link for my personal website is exopoliticsohio.us. And if you Google Ohio Exopolitics, you'll find it. And like I said, I focus my Sundays on the Billy Meier material. And we've had a lot of interesting shows. I don't know. Yeah. Have you snuck into any of those shows as an anonymous person, Solaris?
No, I haven't.
Okay. I get anonymous guests sometimes. I'm wondering.
No, it's not me.
Solaris?
I'd let you know if it was me.
Okay.
But yeah, you have some great guests on your show. You've had some really good hitters in the past.
Thank you. Betsy Lewis was very good. She had she has a really good book out.
Yeah.
What is it called?
She was on here last week.
Prophecy 2 is the book we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And just in the first 20 or 30 pages of that book, I had enough information for a whole hour.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing. When you start really reading books and you start looking through each chapter, I mean, if you really focus on the complexity of each chapter, you realize that there's so much material in there. And sometimes people speed read and they go through and they just don't realize what what it's talking about or what the material is talking about. And that goes for any book, just about. But it's fascinating when you start researching other people's work and you realize that there's a lot more to it than what meets the eye.
There's a ton of material in some of these really, really good books. And that's what was such a pleasure interviewing her, because I had to do almost no work because I read a chapter in a book and I had 30 questions, right? How easy is that? And very interesting stuff. She's had some bizarre paranormal experiences.
Yeah, she has. Yeah.
I don't like to talk about mine that much.
Well, you have had some interesting... now, you have had UFO encounters as a child, right?
I've had UFO encounters as a child. I had some experiences 6 years ago. I lose track of time so badly. But I don't study my own stuff. I should get regressed because I had some very bizarre stuff happen as a child. They don't feel important to me. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah.
So I don't talk about them much.
No, I think that's important. Yeah, just let it go then. Just let it ascend. A lot of people get haunted by experience, and if it's not bothering you in any way, shape, or form, then I wouldn't pursue it personally.
Okay. Would you be regressed?
No, I'm really not big on that. I have an issue with that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Do you think it causes problems? Or?
Well, I think it can. I think that you really have to trust the person doing it, and that there's a lot of subliminal suggestions that go on, and they can, depending on who the person is doing this regression, they can become a handler to the person and start directing them or probing them, and then, and I understand mind control, and I understand there are levels and inserted memories. They insert memories. They can take and delete information. So you have to be very, very careful these days, and it's just not even these days. I think in the old days they were masters at mind control. Right before World War II, they were really using that quite a bit. So I'm a little bit skeptical of people who do hypnosis, and unless you really know who they are and trust them at the soul level, yeah, to be very cautious.
I've even heard of people being hypnotized, like over the internet and over Skype and over the phone, and that seems really dangerous to me.
Yeah, I think it can be, and especially, if you're looking at MK Ultra, the traditional MK Ultra where they use keywords and triggers, then a keyword that person is saying, even if they're not trying to do anything to trigger the subject, will trigger that person into an alter, which can be very dangerous. And people can scoff at mind control, but I have to tell you, it's so valid. The data, if you start looking into it and researching it, it's quite accurate, and it's unbelievable the stuff that they were capable of pulling off.
We are a mind-controlled society right now.
Well, I think that everything is a program. And, when you think about it, thoughts are programs. It's how you use them each day. Belief systems are programs. So depending on what we believe is our reality, right? So everything is a certain form of mind control to some extent. And then, of course, there's television and media and things like that kind of subliminally, program a person if they're maybe weak-minded. I don't want to say necessarily weak, but maybe vulnerable. So you do have to use discernment, and that's what I do from day to day, without a doubt.
Interesting. To me, it's really strange that we function on a belief system.
Right.
Now think about that.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be better to know?
Absolutely.
And wouldn't it be better to just be able to distinguish between what you know?
Exactly. That's how I operate. I go by knowing, not by beliefs.
Yeah, I had to draw that line in my life as well.
And that links you to consciousness, of course, because when you're in knowing, you're knowing because you're merged with higher self, oversoul, superconscious, and source energy, which is, of course, the universal consciousness, the flow of the universe. And there's no, you just know. You just have that knowing, that laser beam accuracy, and that's definitely what I go by versus programming and belief systems, which, of course, have been censored over centuries. Most of what people believe in is actually a replay of something else.
It's so a shame because the world could be so incredibly wonderful.
I agree.
We wouldn't have, if we could just focus and unite and put forth a little logical effort, we could make the earth like a utopia. But we just don't do it for whatever reason. There's been such a we've had a very strange history on the earth, and I think we're still suffering from our history. Well, maybe I can elaborate on that.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to climb down the rabbit hole.
Oh, sure. Let's go.
Well, we talked about the disaster 11,500 years ago that ended Atlantis and Lemuria. And that the Earth, again, spent several thousand years in just kind of a recovery mode. There was an extraterrestrial that came back, or that came to the Earth from Beta Centauri. I believe they called him Eris the 11th. And he was one of the descendants of that Eris the Barbarian that I had talked about at the beginning of the show. Now, Eris the 11th had a son named Jehovan. And Jehovan ruled the earth until about 3,660 years ago. He let himself be called the creator. Now, Jehovan had a son named Jehav, who lived for 340 years into his father's reign and then eventually killed his father. Now, Jehav became megalomaniacal again like his father. So you can imagine this. Okay, this is what the Meier material says. I'm not trying to push it on anyone as the gospel truth. But basically what it's saying is there were these extraterrestrial humans who came to the earth, who posed as the creator, who were at these very, very, very high levels of evolution. And they abused the lesser developed people of the earth at this time. One of these people was named Erisame, and I believe Erisame was one of the sons of his father Jehav. And Erisame wanted to take power that his father had. He had two brothers, Ptah and Selam, who stopped him from coming into power. Now, Erisame had some 72,000 followers, and they gathered their forces and they went far below these old cubicle constructions that were far below the Giza Plateau in an area that had not been inhabited for 70,000 years. And far below the pyramids, deep within the earth, the followers of Erisame established themselves as what the Meier material calls the Giza intelligences. And Erisame ruled until about 3010 BCE. Let me tell you a little bit about the Giza intelligences. The Giza intelligences are also known as the B.F.A, and they always wanted to attain kind of a supremacy over the people of the earth. The Giza intelligences were really a splinter group of the Plejaren, and for thousands of years they deceived the earth, humankind, with religious miracles and visions, and they maintained a control through religious delusion. They appeared to the people as angels and gods, but they were really extraterrestrial humans, and they built this mighty station underneath the pyramids of Giza to orchestrate and guide the religious delusions of the people of the earth. Now, it is said that the Giza intelligences influenced Hitler through the Fool Society. And these Giza intelligence goes back to a time when there were the cities of Greater Atlantis, Lesser Atlantis, and they existed some 113,000 years back. And I was talking about probably one of the originators, which was Erisame, who established himself far below the Giza Plateau. Now, Erisame was eventually killed by a man named Hen. Now, these were vicious people, and they ruled for hundreds of years, and then they were either killed by their sons or killed by people in their family. Hen eventually took over Erisame's rule. Hen, allegedly, and I know this is blasphemous, but was also known as Jehovah, who was forced out of rule by his nephew, the Kamagal I. Kamagal took over leadership of the Giza intelligence, and Kamagal II took over around the 1970s. And allegedly, according to Meier material, the Pleuron forced the last Giza intelligences off of the Earth in the late 70s time frame. Now, the people of the Earth have been suffering from the influence of the Giza intelligences ever since. They have suffered both a kind of telepathic mind control as well as a technological mind control. Somehow these extraterrestrials used both. Anyway, that's my long spiel about the Giza intelligence.
That's quite interesting. And you know what I find is just really interesting to me, but there always appears to be a similar thread in this fabric between your story, which correlates to other stories of extraterrestrials. I mean, whenever you start looking into these avenues, you'll always see a specific race that's involved in some form of control or manipulation, whether it's the Golden Giants or Atlantean Wars or something where there's a race that's an off-world race that starts a conflict with another race and at the expense of the people of the Earth, whether they're off-worlders or not, or whatever species they are. And I know we have many species here on this planet in a quote-unquote human form, it's like we like to call it. But I find it very interesting nonetheless, and I like to try to absorb as much data as I can. And I've heard a lot of different information. I mean, we've talked about Antarctica on my show before, I'm sure you're familiar with. So many things. There's so many different avenues to start walking down.
Well, you made me think of something. There's a race of beings called the Hyperboreans.
Right, yeah.
And they're supposed to have a city in Mount Shasta, a small city where 700 people live that's beneath Mount Shasta, and they are the leftover descendants of a group of extraterrestrial humans that lived on the Earth in the past. And sometimes you can see their golden-colored spherical spacecraft coming out of Mount Shasta and sometimes Mount Mammoth. And the city that they have is allegedly very deep in the center of Mount Shasta, and the entrance is real camouflaged. And the Hyperboreans also themselves get visits from people from other worlds, and they allegedly carry these beam weapons to sometimes stun Earth humans who get too close. Mm-hmm. And these Hyperboreans are also living deep underground near the Aleutian Islands in Alaska.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, whenever I start hearing stories like that, it reminds me so much of the Black Space program. So
really?
Take that for what it's worth. But yeah, and so far as advanced technology goes, I mean, I understand we have a Black Space program, which obviously has technology that surpasses anything that the regular Joe has been exposed to, So, I mean, I'm very much convinced that we are deploying that in one form or another. Now, how it takes form to people who come into contact with it is another scenario. But I do know the covert aspects of the synthetic telepathy and things like that. So I find it very fascinating. And, I think it was your friend and mine, Jim Nichols, he's talked about that also.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Quite a bit.
There's a fascinating movie. Actually, I scheduled a interview with Dr. J.J. Hartak. Mm-hmm. His wife are coming on the show, I think it's April 5th. Boy, I need to get onto my schedule and get this all written down. Awesome. You're so organized, Solaris. You have everything planned out months ahead of time.
I know. I'm weird like that.
But that's good. I mean, but J.J. Hartak has done some incredible research on the inner Earth. I think that Colonel Wendell Stevens also did some fascinating research on the inner Earth. I wonder if, in fact, there is an ancient civilization living down there.
Right, and we've talked about that before.
Extraterrestrial roots.
Right, I really think so. I think that in one form or another, I mean, I'm looking at frequencies and bands of energy, and whether you see it physically or not, I mean, there are a lot of things in other planets or on other planets that people might perceive as not being alive just because they can't pick up the frequency. So my take is that we are dealing with a holographic planet, a multidimensional planet that we can pierce through frequency. And actually, I believe there are other forms of beings that exist in other dimensions simultaneously here on this planet. Now, if you want to call that the inner Earth, then so be it. But I do think there's more than meets the eye, for sure. What do you think?
The Indians are said to have known of entrances to these huge underground cities, and before the cyclic end of the last age, some of these humans were brought to safety in the inner earth. And I think some of them have a very bluish skin and kind of a golden angelic hair.
Right.
And they existed far beneath. Even in South America, there are stories of very ancient cities. And I think that the SS troops went down to some of these ancient cities, and I think one faction of the Nazis probably had interaction with these advanced extraterrestrials. Anyway, that's the legend.
Yeah,
I find it fascinating.
Well, I do too. And, there's that saying, we are our ancestors. So I have a tendency to believe that as well, that we are the star beings that we are looking for. But all the answers are in our cells and our atoms and our atomic structure. Through, and this happens through activation. We become more aware of that. But, Gary David was on my show, and he was discussing that as well, and with the Hopi tribes and things like that. So, once again, you have the similar language, all of these belief systems, all of these events, and they're all kind of lining up and adding up into the same equation.
And if you think reincarnation is real, then we definitely are our ancestors.
Yeah, it certainly can be, without a doubt.
One of the things that Semyase told Billy was that the Earth human, focuses too much on materialistic intellectual thinking, and that we need to get back to spiritual intellectual thinking, where we're using the deepest intuitions of the human spirit. And that's part of the problem, I think, with Earth humanity, is we're focused on materialism.
Right.
And that's one of the warnings that Svath gave Billy over and over again, is don't fall into the trap of materialism. And I think Billy is non-materialistic to a fault.
Right. Oh.
But the greed in the third millennium is very materialistic.
Oh, yeah, it's like a gravity well, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And it's just a form of energy. I mean, even when you look at money is a form of energy. Use it however, but it's still a construct of energy and consciousness.
And money is a very, very strange thing, because one of the things I think that the controllers do, the people in the New World Order, is to keep us always working all the time and keeping us almost in a state of exhaustion. And that is by design, I think.
I agree. And distracted, too.
Yeah.
So
very distracted.
Yeah.
If you're exhausted, it's very easy to become a zombie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and then you just want to sit down and watch television. I mean, I totally get that linear lifestyle. Yeah, you have to be out there and interact with nature and the earth and the world. But, there's a fine balance, because nobody wants to be out on the street. But at the same time, the system is set up to really kind of push us in a direction of failing on a spiritual level, if you ask me.
It is. The control mechanisms in society today want to shut down your spiritual life. And that's why this extraterrestrial material is ridiculed. Because this is the thing that can bust it all wide open.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, what people don't understand, they usually reject. And, I understand that when we talk UFOs and extraterrestrial, it gets really, it's hard for people to grasp that. And unless you actually experience it, it's really difficult to have a resonance with. But usually at some point in the continuum, people start to decode things on a subconscious, higher self level, and they'll start to see through the veil and start understanding that there's more than meets the eye. And even if his material isn't 100% accurate, I'm sure there are threads of information that are. And that's why I asked you about, the covert space program. And they were working around a lot of UFOs. They were building UFOs back then. I mean, man-made, manufactured UFOs. And that's why I asked about Billy Meier being exposed to that, because it could have triggered a whole different arena of technology and information based on the covert space program.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the space program, because allegedly these are. And by the way, let me throw this out to your listeners since we're on this subject. In 1995, the Plejaren revealed their true identity. Up until that point, most of the UFO community knew them as the Pleiadians. They are not the Pleiadians. There's no life in the Pleiades. There's maybe, you might have some very small kind of organic life in the Pleiades, but there's no human life in the Pleiades. The suns are too young. The Pleiaren are from a different star system, some 80 light years beyond the Pleiades. And during the main contact time on the Earth, which was between 75 and 86, there were 2,862 extraterrestrial humans on the Earth. They were from the Pleiaren system, they were from nearby stars, and they were from the Tao universe. And they resided in 3 different bases. A base in North America, a base in Asia, and a base in Switzerland. The base in Switzerland had been here for like 350 years. Now, they left in 1985. They revealed their true identity. They wouldn't tell us why they were leaving. But one interesting thing that kind of goes back to this whole idea of the space program. The Pleiaren, 50,000 years ago, achieved peace. And they did it. They started to take advice from this group of higher beings from the Andromeda Galaxy. They call them the High Council. They don't have to take the advice. They can take it or leave it. Now, if you look at human evolution from the perspective of the Meier material, there are 7 steps in human evolution. We here on Earth are at the 2nd step. The Pleiaren are at the 5th stage. These beings from the High Council are at the 6th stage. The 6th stage is called the Patali level. And at the Patali level, we start to phase shift between the material matter and the spiritual world, back and forth. So these beings from the Andromeda Galaxy sometimes give advice. And they actually gave advice to an extraterrestrial named Ptah concerning Billy. And according to Meier material, the Apollo 11 moon landing was hoaxed. And the High Council told the people in the Meier group not to release that material until 2004. Because if they did, they said they risked Billy being murdered and some kind of warlike actions taking place. So there is this interaction between the secret space program, global geopolitics. I think the leaders of the Earth know full well about the Meier material. Colonel Wendell Stevens, every time he went to Switzerland, he was debriefed by the CIA.
Yeah, what does that tell you?
There's one case where a French Mirage fighter would come through and make passes at Semyassi's ship. Of course, doesn't have any chance of really doing any damage. But I think our governments want to shut down this information, most of all. Because this information will lead people of the Earth to spiritual growth. And that's the one thing the controlling powers do not want.
Right.
They want to keep the people of the Earth in materialism. They want to keep us buying. They want to keep us watching our TVs, watching our sports programs, watching our music stars, and completely distracted from anything of real importance, like spirituality.
And at the same time, I think it's our destiny to be merged with universal flow. So it's almost like it's going to be negated one way or another, but they certainly have tried a lot. And, I've seen censorship since day one. I mean, I think since we're birthed onto the world, we receive censorship and deception without a doubt. So, yeah, I don't discount a lot of this information. I mean, whenever the military is involved or you have CIA or different divisions involved, usually there's a reason for it.
Absolutely. And I think it's very interesting. There's so many different aspects. There's what you have been exposed to. We've all been exposed to different little bits and pieces. And that's what's kind of so interesting about listening. That's one of the really fun things about having a radio show in being a radio show host is to just be neutral and have an open mind and let people express their information, because certainly there's probably something good in there.
Oh, absolutely.
Don't believe it or disbelieve it. Everyone has to believe it or disbelieve it. Just let it be what it is. And don't reject it. Don't totally accept it either. But after time, some of these things, you'll see some dots connect.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's like researching in a library.
Yeah.
You just keep going through information, but once in a while you'll start seeing everything add up.
I wanted to ask you, are you writing a book right now? Are you thinking about this?
I am writing a book. I'm writing a sci-fi that's almost finished.
Really?
Is that the one you're talking about? Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
that's what I've been working on.
For a couple months ago, you were talking about it.
I am. I'm almost ready. Yeah, it's a science fiction book.
I've never written a book. I have enough material, I think, for a book now, but
definitely.
I really don't know how to do it. I mean, I don't know.
Just do it, Mark. You just put the chapters together and go.
Well, they're there. I mean, I can just do a little spell checking. Do you then send it off to a publisher? Is that? Yeah,
you can go to I self-publish. I like self-publishing because there's no censorship involved.
Publish.
What's that?
How do you self-publish?
Well, you just look online, and I can give you the names of certain agencies and areas that I use that I think are pretty decent. Mm-hmm. And I've heard some other things, too, where you can independently publish on, I forget what, Create Space or something like that, which I hear good things about. I've never used it. So there are definitely different avenues to publish your work, but I would really strongly suggest you do.
Well, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And also, are you writing any new music?
Oh, boy, that's a whole nother discussion. Yeah, I have a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of interesting stuff happening in terms of the music. It's a real challenge, It's like we were saying, the whole corporate world kind of sucks the life out of you. And I'm bordering all the time on this weird kind of exhaustion state, which is not a good thing to do because I'm just doing too much, But there's a lot of neat, interesting music. And sometimes I have to find people to take over my radio show sometimes too, because I have to go play music somewhere.
Well, I think that's good though. You need that outlet. When you're teetering on the world or in between the worlds, between the material and spirituality, it's good to have a creative outlet. Well,
that is so profound the way you put that. Teetering in the different worlds between spirituality and this weird corporate world that we live in. Mm-hmm. That's so cutthroat.
It really is, but that's the truth, It
is. It's a weird, because I think there's a lot of victims.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, corporate, nobody likes to work like that. I mean, everybody wants to be their own master and their own boss. There's no doubt about that. And I think that we were designed to be that way, actually. I don't think we're designed to be part of this illusion, but I think it will break away. You don't want to give your dreams away, and that's what I've noticed. That you don't delegate your power and your dreams to someone else. Make your dreams your reality. That's what I see.
Advice.
Well, that's what you're doing with your music as well. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice to put some of the Billy Meier quotes to music?
Yeah, that would be really cool.
I bet you'd be really good at that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's all linked in ways that it's very interesting. I don't think we yet understand how we know, how we understand. For example, in the programming world, very left-brained. It's all analytical. It's very machine-like, very step-by-step, very logical. And that's a very good thinking skill, and it's a good skill to have. But that's not how humans work. Mm-hmm. We're intuitive. We're really right-brained. We're artists. We're lovers. We're not machines. That's why this whole transhumanistic movement is really, I just don't think is good.
No, it takes away the soul aspects. And what's interesting, though, you do want to balance the hemispheres. I mean, you do want to have an analytical side. So it's good to balance both the right and left hemisphere.
Oh, yeah.
Without a doubt.
But, our society is designed to have one dominate the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you're balanced, then you're strange.
Right.
You're not supposed to be able to be an artist and an analytical thinker. you know.
Well, you are, and so am I.
Do you ever feel like you don't belong here?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Wrong planet, wrong timeline. All the time.
Yeah, it is interesting. We have a very strange world, and I like to talk to people in the Matrix sometimes because I like to gently wake them up. I enjoy that, and maybe it's just a little bit of the orneriness in me, but because there's very, very logical things you can ask them that will wake them up. You know, just like the little question about Fukushima. The way I word it is like this. When I ask them about Fukushima, they say, "What's Fukushima?" I say, "It's the greatest disaster in recorded history." And then they say, "Whoa, you know, that's the..." And then I tell them what it is. And then they have to draw their own conclusions.
Right.
You see what I'm... You see where I'm...
Oh, yeah. They're just not informed. But I don't even know if they want to be at this point. You know, it seems to me like they're in a safe bubble, and they don't want to be moved out of that little bubble.
Well, that's interesting, the safe bubble. And, you know, why is it that people like you and I don't want to be in the safe bubble?
Well, because we know what reality is, and what they've presented to us is an illusion. That's why.
And it's interesting that the powers that be are trying to reinforce that illusion so much today.
Yeah, but it seems so thin. I mean, to me, it's just so easy to see the deception. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see what's happening across the globe. So to me, what they call transparency is really obvious. It is transparent. It's transparent, clear, and obvious. And, you know, people need to wake up and go beyond it all, because there's a better world waiting to descend onto this one.
There's an awesome, fantastic world that is waiting for us. Maybe that's why I enjoy the Meier materials so much. I know we're probably running a little bit out of time, but I wanted to tell you about Billy's second teacher. We talked a little bit about semioticity, not a whole lot, but a little bit. But he was told by Svath on a certain day to go up on this hill and wait, and that he would start to meet with his second teacher, because Svath was very old. Svath at this time was about 1,100 years old. And Billy's waiting on this hill. He's only 16 years old. And then out of the sky comes this craft, and it lands very close to where he is. And the hatch opens, and Billy literally feels drawn inside. So he literally walks inside this small ship, and there's no one in there. And there's a seat, and so he says, well, maybe I should sit down. So he sits down in this seat, and then the ship starts to just fly away. And then it becomes transparent, and he can see through the ship, and he's kind of shocked, and the ground's getting smaller, and it's moving faster and faster, the ship. And he looks at his own hands, and he can't see his own hands, and he realizes that he's invisible, the ship's invisible, and he's going somewhere very fast, and he doesn't know where. And he's looking down at the changing scenery, and he finally realizes, wow, he's in the Middle East. And then he sees the Great Pyramids zoom underneath him, zoom, zoom. And this ship lands. And, of course, he's a little bit in shock over this experience, and he steps out of the ship. And by then, it's starting to get kind of dark. And then out of the sky comes this, what looks like a falling star, and it's lighting up the whole landscape. And this star gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and finally realizes it's a massive ship. It's a disc. It's about 300 foot in diameter. And it lands, and then nothing happens. It just sits there for like a half an hour, and Billy's like, what the heck's going on? And finally, out of this craft steps a woman, a very strikingly beautiful woman, and he thinks he knows her. He just knows her somehow. And she walks over to him, and he asks her, he says, why is it that I feel I know you? And Asket tells him, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you to examine your own memories. and you may find the answers yourself. And she reaches over and she puts this little device on his belt. And she presses a button on this device, and she presses a button on her own belt, and they both become invisible. She introduces herself as Ask It, and that she says that for the next 11 years, I'll be your teacher. And they're in the Middle East, and they're very close to the Great Pyramid of Giza. And she takes him into the Great Pyramid of Giza, and down this long passageway in the dark, and far, far below the Giza Plateau they go, and then finally they come into this great hallway. And there's this giant disc in this hallway, and there are these guards which can't see them because Ask It and Billy are invisible at this point, and they see what looks like the artifacts of the crucifixion of Christ. And Billy is just blown away. He's in shock by what he's seen. He's trying to put all this information together. And Ask It sees that he's kind of overwhelmed, so they leave and they go back up these long passageways and eventually outside the Great Pyramid. And this is Billy's first meeting with this woman from the Tao universe. Now, the Tao universe, according to the Meier material, is a parallel universe to ours. Meier material says that 46 trillion years ago, our universe was created, and a parallel universe called the Tao universe was already formed. Now, p.m.EST told Billy later that their forefathers were our forefathers, and we had talked about the Lyrians before. Well, the Plauran are the descendants of the Lyrians, and Ask It's people are also the descendants of the Lyrians. So what we're talking about in this extraterrestrial information is the greater family of mankind. Now, the Timmers, the descendants of the Lyrians, left our universe and entered into this Tao universe. And Ask It would be Billy's teacher for the next 11 years. So Billy decided that he would leave Switzerland and that he would start traveling around the earth. In particular, he would study the religions of the earth. And he went to what's called the Ashoka Ashram in India. And he started to study the various spiritual teachings in India in this Ashoka Ashram. Well, it's a kind of a documented fact that the gardeners there at the Ashoka Ashram would see Billy walking in the gardens with this woman, this beautiful woman, who they called a goddess from heaven. Now, one of the people at the Ashoka Ashram was a young girl who was about 10 years old at this time. Her name was Phobal Chang. She would eventually become a UN diplomat. And she saw Billy, she met Billy, and she saw this woman Ask It, that Billy would have these very deep conversations with on a regular basis. And the people there at the Ashoka Ashram would see this giant spacecraft hovering over the Ashoka Ashram. Now, the people of India, they accept this. To them, it's not that strange. It's part of their culture. It's a part of their history. Now, Phobal Chang eventually, years later, when she was an adult, came and visited Billy and reminisced about their times at the Ashoka Ashram. You can also watch that. There's a really interesting YouTube video where Phobal Chang talks about seeing Billy with this woman from another world, from this woman actually from another universe. I know we're running a little short on time here, so I'll try to wrap this up. But the fourth contact that Billy had with Ask It, to me, is one of the most interesting contacts that Billy had. It was more of a teaching session where Ask It told Billy that in 9,545 BC, there was a great flood on the earth. By the way, there were multiple great floods on the earth. This flood was for seen by kind of a remote viewer, a seer. His name was Sarid. And he saw this giant comet come through our solar system, followed by 7 smaller comets. And it came close to the Earth, this great comet, which was like 1.72 times the mass of the Earth. It literally caused the Earth to turn and literally caused the oceans to spill over whole vast areas of land. It was a disaster. It was a tremendous catastrophe. And Sarid saw all this, and he saw some of these smaller comets hit the Earth. And he saw just, almost all of humanity destroyed. Now, this was a future event that he was seeing, and it would happen 300 years from the time of the original remote viewing session, vision, whatever you want to call it. And he told his father, who was named King Saluk. And what they did was they coated the Great Pyramid with lime to make it watertight. And then for 300 years, these people who were in this line took food and water deep below the Giza pyramids. And when the flood came, they were safe because all this area was watertight, and that's how they survived this great disaster. And one of the interesting things about that contact with Billy is that Aska told Billy that the Great Pyramid of Giza was 73,000 years old, and it was designed by people who were extraterrestrial humans. I believe they were called the Celestial Sons. They were, I think, from Orion. They were probably descendants of the Lyrians. But one of the interesting things was that neither Semyase or Asket were allowed to tell Billy the original purpose of the Great Pyramids. So that's one of the mysteries that's kind of... It probably opens up a whole area of knowledge that we're probably not ready yet. But that's one of the aspects of the Meier material I find so interesting.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that one. That's very, very interesting. It makes a lot of sense, too.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
These great monolithic structures all over the Earth are so interesting. I love studying the Great Pyramid. Mm-hmm. I love some of the facts about the Great Pyramid. I don't know if there's 2,300,000 stones in the Great Pyramid. It's 13 acres at the base. I think it's 481 feet high. In the King's Chamber are 140-ton granite stones that are polished so perfectly you can see your own reflection.
Yeah.
And they fit together so perfectly you can hardly fit a razor blade between them. They came from a quarry some 500 miles away, and they were lifted up some 280 feet. The technology that really is part of the Great Pyramid is an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm. Not a doubt. And it reminds me of the Great Pyramid being a trigger to activate one at the soul level almost.
It probably is.
About it, yeah. It's fascinating. Such an attraction. I mean, it's a universal attraction. Everyone is drawn to the power of the Great Pyramid.
Giorgio Tsoukalos, I think he's a great guest, and he was, I think, on Coast to Coast back in 2011 in July. And there's this wonderful quote, I've often remembered it. He said there's an ancient manuscript in Egypt called the Al-Hittat that said the pyramids were built by the Egyptians with the assistance of the guardians of the sky or the watchers of heaven. That has stuck with me for years. I think that's absolutely awesome.
Mm-hmm. I like it too. No doubt. And we are getting ready to wrap this up pretty soon, Mark. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show tonight. I hope to have you back. It's incredible to have you here and listen to your information. Very well relayed.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I always like talking.
Oh, my pleasure. And also, I want everybody to be able to access your website. So once again, if you can give everybody your website and where they can get in touch with you.
Oh, if they Google Ohio Exopolitics, they'll find exopoliticsohio.us is one of the websites. And from there are links to Blog Talk Radio, into Revolution Radio. And, I always enjoy people coming to the show. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the show to talk about the Meier material.
Oh, my pleasure, Mark. Anytime. Yeah, I'd like your fresh approach to the material. I really do. I appreciate the information. You have different insight insofar as what you're reading and experiencing. And also, I was going to ask you, do you actually keep a diary of your own experiences?
I have written them down. I can never find them when I want to find them.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you have some profound experiences, which is why I was asking you.
Well, I've had a few that are very, very interesting. I haven't yet made any sense out of them is the problem. Mm-hmm. That's why I don't talk about them much, because I haven't figured out what they mean yet.
Well, that's interesting, because one of these days you're going to pull all that material out and look at it and say, oh, now I understand.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. We get that psychic vision going, and then we write everything down, and then sometimes it doesn't make sense, and then you look at it a few years later, and it does.
Do you have a psychic vision?
Oh, yeah. I do that all the time. I used to do a lot of automatic writing, but yeah, a lot of it comes out through my work, through my books. Sort of.
What happens when you have these visions?
I just interpolate the data. A lot of it is remote viewing, and a lot of it is just me, writing down the information and then assessing it later on. But I'm pretty analytical, so I'll look at it from a higher perspective and break it down. And it does make sense. But, I used to write things ahead of time in the illusion of time, and then years down the road it would come to pass, and I wouldn't think twice about it. And now I'm understanding it, how it all works. So, yeah, don't ever discount your psychic vision and your radar, because eventually it really starts to manifest your reality. It's fascinating.
Very, very interesting.
It is.
I have never seen things that are going to occur. Is that what you see? Do you see things?
Yeah, I get a lot of hits on stuff. I just don't talk about it.
Do you?
Yeah.
When you see these things.
It's not disturbing to me in any form. I just write it down and just kind of stay detached as an observer.
Do you put it in your books at all?
I do. I have it in some of my books, and I think my original book, in Transmutation Through Ascension, I wrote about. I put a lot of data in there as well. But yeah.
Well, I'll let you know if I get any visions of the future.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the correlation between the Billy Meier material and some of the events happening now are quite interesting. And, of course, he has been able to provide us with information that did come to pass from what I remember.
Yeah.
Predicted quite a bit.
I forget the exact date of the Hanok prophecies, but they did predict the Twin Tower thing. Mm-hmm. The strike on the Twin Towers. I think I'd have to look it up. It's probably just taking me a second to look up. But
we have a few minutes.
They predicted the World Trade Center being destroyed.
Mm-hmm. 2 minutes.
And Hanok 2:15. Well, we'll just have to, maybe we'll leave that for the next time.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to have you back, so keep that in mind. And also, real quickly, what is your impression of the children being born today? You think they're a different breed, different starseed, or engineered?
The most concern I have is that people are becoming increasingly more uneducated. And I think that is why shows like yours, Solaris, are so important, that you continue to do what you do, so that the young people that are coming up can have access to this higher information. And it may be a matter of survival for the people of the earth. Mm-hmm. So never be discouraged. Keep focusing on what you think you should be doing, and eventually your work will pay off.
I agree. Well, likewise, that goes for you, too, because you're doing some incredible work also as a host. I've listened to your shows, and I've been on your show, and I respect what you're doing. You're really right on track. And, of course, living in between worlds, as we were talking about, it's hard to do.
It's interesting. I'd like to examine that some more. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Do you feel that the people that are interested in this material are kind of torn between a spiritual existence and a material one?
Well, I think they get overwhelmed in the material world, and then it's hard to process data like Billy Meier. It's so out there, it's so expanded, and it's, we're talking about extraterrestrials and this and that, so it's really hard for people to digest. But once again, they're conditioned to a linear reality, so it's you kind of have to calibrate people slowly, and, just like I said, and we've talked about, just do what works for you. Just read it and don't have any judgments on it one way or another. And I think people will start processing things accordingly.
Well, that's one of the keys, is to stay neutral.
I so agree. And with that being said, it's been a pleasure to have you on, Mark, and I wish you all the best in all you do, and hope to have you back very, very soon. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoyed the show at Dark Matter Radio, and stay tuned next week, everybody. Night. Mark.